My name is Meka Green. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified grief specialist, certified trauma specialist. And I was sitting here trying to figure out how I wanted to start this series. And I figured that I would just literally start where trauma had me fucked up. So let's get into it. This is season 1 of Trauma Got Me Fucked Up. So when I was about 7 years old, my mother went to prison. And my little sister was about 2 or 3. And when my mother went to prison, we went to live with my grandmother. And when we lived with my grandmother, suddenly she got ill from cancer. And so I didn't know anything about cancer. I really didn't even know what was going on at the time. I just knew that grandma was sick and we had to go live with my aunt. And so when we went to go live with my aunt, things just took a certain change, right? And when we went to live with my aunt, I remember her going back and forth to the hospital to see my grandmother. And I remember one day she came in and she was just like really sad. And so she started telling us, that grandma wasn't really doing so well, that she's probably not going to make it. And so in my young mind, I still couldn't really grasp what that meant. And it felt like the next day, even though it could have been more than that, but it felt like the next day that my aunt came in and my grandmother was gone. She had passed away. And just getting emotional now thinking about it. That was my first introduction into death and grief. And so no one really explained what that meant, what that looked like. I just knew that, that she was gone. And so I remember my aunt telling me that we were going to see my mother. And she was going to meet us at the funeral home. And it was a funeral home in Detroit called Swanson's Funeral Home. And it's pretty well known there in the city. And my aunt was like, you're going to meet your mother there. And so we can be able to see grandma. And I don't remember much conversation outside of that. But what I do remember vividly was that day. And the day that we were set to meet my mother at the funeral home, I remember my sister and I being all dressed up. It was very, very early in the morning, and my aunt lived about a few blocks from the funeral home. And so when we got to the funeral home, I just remember that the air was brisk cold. I mean, freezing, like the type of cold where when you talk, you can see like the smoke from your mouth. And we were in the parking lot and my aunt walks us in, my sister and I, and she had to leave us. And we're there at the funeral home with the people that are there. And so the funeral home had just opened. There was not a lot of people there because, naturally, I guess because my mother had to come from prison, so I guess nobody could be there. And I remember waiting, and then finally my mother comes in with the guards, and it's just a very vivid image that's like stuck in my head because my mother was like the it girl, like she was always the girl in, the floor-length mink coats, the jewelry, the hair, the everything, like she was that girl in Detroit. And when she walked in, she had like cornrows going to the back. She was like in a blue jumpsuit, shackles, and the guards brought her in. I remember like wanting to rush, to rush to her, but we couldn't. And, finally she's they unhandcuff her, and she come over to us, and her face is just sad, real sad. And so we walk into this room, and in the room is my grandmother, just laying in the casket. And I remember my mom crying heavily. And my sister, she's too young. She really doesn't know what's going on. I really still don't understand what's going on because I'm young too. And I just remember my mother grabbing my hand and, excuse me, my mother grabbing my hand and like pulling me over to the casket. And as she's pulling me over to the casket, I'm just like deathly afraid. Cause I'm like I know this looks like my grandmother, but like what is going on? And she pulls me close to the casket and I like touched my grandmother's hand and it just was hard. Like it freaked me out. And I just pulled back and ran to the chairs that was behind us. And I just sat there and I just remember my mother like just weeping, just very sad moment. And so I'm not even sure how long we were able to be there, but it felt very short. And I know that like immediately the guards came in and they came to get my mother. She had to leave and she was handcuffed again and all that. And it just was a very tough moment for a little girl. But honestly, it was a tough moment for all of us. And so now sitting here as a therapist, grief specialist, trauma specialist, like now I'm looking at it from a different lens of, here it is, my sister who's very young, who doesn't really understand what's going on in the moment, but she is still being affected because there was a seed of attachment issues that's being placed inside of her at that moment. The fact that she's disconnected from her mother. And here I am, like wanting to be with my mom, but yet she has to leave. My grandmother, who is now gone, not really understanding the magnitude of that because she was the pillar in the family of what that even means. And, my heart just really going out to my mother too in that moment of here we are somewhat trying to have a visit, but then it's not a visit because she's having to mourn the loss of her mother. And so here we all are in this moment dealing with the magnitude of grief and trauma. And I just can't even imagine like what my mother had to sit with in that moment or years to come. And what we know about when people go to prison, that you can't really openly mourn or show emotions or things like that. So I imagine that when she left, she had to just stuff it, right? And so it wasn't that she was just stuffing it. We all were stuffing it. Because literally after that day, we never spoke of that moment again. Yeah, so trauma had me fucked up. And so as you'll see in this series, as we navigate the lives of others that trauma has touched, you will start to see that they are either still in it or they're coming out of it. And again, as I sit here, my biggest thing is to be the voice for those that have suffered from trauma. And then again, that have made their way out or still in it. But I thank you. And this is season 1 of Trauma Got Me Fucked Up.